right, thank you, Jung Ho, and also thank you, Nina, for your wonderful talk this morning. I guess what we will do here is I would invite questions from both on-site and online. For the on-site participants, perhaps we do have a microphone passing around, right? So we will, for the on-site participants, would you perhaps ask the questions through, just say your questions. But for online participants, perhaps we can type our questions in the chat room. And what I plan to do is to do, alternatively, one on site and then the online and see how it goes. And Jung Ho, we do have time until 9:30, right? 10:30, right? 10:30, right? I believe that's the end time. So thank you very much, Nina. I guess as the facilitator, I have the privilege to ask the first question because you bring news stories from literally half the globe away. South Africa, South America, it's the other side of the globe from East Asia. But when I listen to your sharing, I find that the same thing actually happens all over the world. There was so much conflict, so much death, suffering, but also Christians everywhere in the world understand that we need to bring hope and peace to those around. So thank you very much. My question is that I hear that we always go in and bring hope and peace to people who has been affected by conflict, violence, conflict. And my question is that what does peace and hope look like while conflict is still going on? I heard that there are peace and hope in Latin America. They are doing things like that. Wow, especially in Peru, if I understand correctly. But it's really difficult, especially if we don't have the power to stop the violence. Could you share a little bit on what can be done while conflict is still going on? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bernard. If I understood correctly, you would like to know what's happening in Peru with regards to the internal conflict. Okay. Right. The conflict ended. We historians say that most of the political violence in Peru ended in year 2000, when the president that had been elected and had become an autocrat he left the presidency and escaped to Japan because he was actually a Japanese citizen. When that happened, the Peace and Hope team, some people in the team were discussing, well, maybe we don't have anything else to do. The war is over. And we were born out of that conflict, and the armed conflict is finished. Maybe we need to just go back to whatever else we could do. But when we turn around to look at the country, what we found is that the internal armed conflict had ended, but Peru had become a very violent country. Violence against women and children, against people with disabilities, the profound cleavages in society had become exposed by the war. So we realized that we needed to actually keep working on the roots that had caused so much violence. And we found that in part, that violence comes from being so, in human terms, so socially, economically, and politically unequal. The difference between men and women, and the difference between people from the coast versus the people from the highlands, who are what we call our native population, with their own ancestral culture and languages. They have been so traumatized. So the work that Peace and Hope has been doing since the end of the internal conflict actually is very much peace building, trying to respond to the reasons, to the causes of the war. And it is a very much long-term commitment. There is no quick answers to historical injustices of 500 plus years.
Right. Thank you very much. I'd like to see if there are any questions from the on-site participants. Anybody wants to ask a question? And
yeah, from here, let me take the privilege of asking the first question. I was very impressed with all the people that who are involved in Paz and Paz Esperanza in Latin America from several different countries. And what you are doing is not what just money can offer, but you need people. You need dedicated people who will wholeheartedly devote to this ministry. So I was wondering, how were you able to get those people? And is there any support system for them not to be burnt out? Or how are you supporting these people?
Thank you so much. Was that Jung Ho? I couldn't see who was speaking. Is that Jung Ho? Yes, thank you. Well, how the Lord has put together the different teams, it's a miracle, I would say. I cannot take credit for that. One thing that I think is part of our commitment to the Peace and Hope movement is that we participate in different capacities. I am a volunteer with the movement. Thanks to God and thanks to DDS, I have a job that I love, and that allows me to pursue this ministry without having to be a burden to the movement itself. And like me, we have several people, almost, I think in all the countries where we are serving, we have a very high number of volunteers. And I think that comes from the attitude of the founders of seeking collaboration, of seeking partnership with the local churches. As I explained, the most natural, immediate partner are the Protestant churches of Latin America, but also the Catholic Church, which was a great surprise for many in the team at the beginning, because we, in our formation, I must confess with sadness, in our church where I grew, where I was raised as a young Christian, as a young evangelical, we were taught very wrong things about Catholics, and that we were the enemy, that they were that, like they are, that they're told we steal their people, and we think we are saving people from them. So it's been a process, a long process of discovering how much we actually have in common and how we can achieve God's will when we come together to lament and to seek hope together. So I will not take credit. I don't think any of us can take credit for the people who have come. We need to discern for sure. Not everybody who has joined our teams have had the best intentions. So it takes also a lot of wisdom to see who is joining with what motivation, and to accompany them so that they see that the people that we are serving, they are first. They are the most important in the ministry, not those who are called the leaders, those who may have more power from different perspectives. Maybe to finish this answering very incompletely this great question, we are very aware of the power dynamics, and we don't want to repeat colonization patterns. When we come to serve, when our teams go to serve, first of all, we recruit volunteers locally. So we learn from the communities. We hear from them their stories, and we want to hear from them how we can address the roots of the problems, not just we have been doing distribution of food and medicine during the COVID pandemic. That we had no choice. But we always try to go back to what can the community do by themselves, and we are supporting them. We want to follow their lead. We want to contribute to their leadership formation, and for sure we want to focus on the youth. It's actually quite a mystery to me how the Lord is bringing such incredible people to our teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Actually, our speaker from yesterday, Professor Soong-Chan Rai, he is also here to answer and have dialogue. So if you have any questions for both Nina and Soong-Chan, welcome to speak out. A question from our online participants. He is asking about how the US and global powers are part of the conflict and suffering. Nina, you just mentioned a little bit, beware about, colonial powers still. You have anything to add or, yeah?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But I promise to be very brief because I know there are
Yeah.
also other.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Yes. These conflicts have the roots in the Cold War. They have developed in very different ways in Peru and Colombia. But in the case of Colombia, the role that the US has played until fairly recently was, I would argue, very negative, really exacerbating the conflict. Colombia is in South America, especially Quechua peasants of Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia grow not cocaine. They grow coca. It's a natural product that our ancestors used for medicinal purposes. But it can be used when mixed with very bad stuff. It becomes this terrible drug that kills people, poisons people. Unfortunately, it is easy to grow and gives very poor people a lot of income. Comparatively to growing potatoes or coffee or fruits, growing drugs is so easy. And sadly, the policies from the Reagan administration forward were very, very bad because they militarized the conflict instead of trying to find ways for peasants to actually find business that would make sense, that they could actually invest in more profitable growing of produce. So the United States, rather than partnering with them and with the Colombian government and with the people in that way, actually militarized the conflict even further. I am going to stop there because I can be very political. So I look forward to more questions. Thank you.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot behind that, but yeah, we will listen to you perhaps later. Soong-Chan, you have anything to add on a similar vein, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm in a tricky situation because I am an American, but I'm also Korean American. So I would offer a critique as both an insider and an outsider. And the way I would do that in terms of like the bigger picture of it is that when we address U.S. hegemony, U.S. misuse of power, we tend to focus on two areas. And this is pretty typical, even in the churches we do this. The two areas we focus on is individual problems and social systemic problems. And so in the US, especially among evangelicals, the individual is much more important to address the problem. So it could be as much as, hey, we got to change who the president is, or we got to change who the individuals in the Supreme Court are, or who the senator is. So the focus is on changing the individuals to change things. It's been, obviously, I think it's been demonstrated that that's not the way it works, because you can keep changing out of individuals, but the policies have pretty much remained the same. And then the issue is on, well, what if you change the systems and structures? What if you change policy? What if you change the way the State Department does things, or the way that the larger government does things, not just the individuals in that government? That also, I think, has proven to not always be effective. What I've been thinking through is, how do you not just change individuals and systems and structures? You have to do both. You can't avoid changing systems and changing individuals. But underneath that are the narratives that drive the individuals and drive the systems. And I think we do need people working on all three levels. We need individuals who bring social systemic change. We need individuals, or we need to change individuals. Those are not negotiable in terms of how transformation and change comes. So we do need to vote out people who are obviously incompetent and creating dissension and creating difficult situations, but we also need to change the system. But the tougher one that I think the church can do is changing the narratives. The narratives that drive the systems, the narratives that drive the individuals. And that to me is where Lament becomes an important counter narrative to the existing narrative. So if, for example, a lot of what's driving these policies is greed and materialism, I'm not sure we're going to be able to change the systems and structures without changing the narrative of greed and materialism, right? So it's not just kind of changing the surface issue of, hey, let's change this policy, let's not have this person as the Secretary of State. Maybe more so is the larger driving narratives, imagination that feeds these individuals and systems and structures. And so it's a little more complicated. And again, I go back to, that's where the church can have the most significant impact, because the church, we operate in imagination and narratives. That's how we understand the world, the imagination and narrative of theology. And so part of our contribution should be what counter narratives exist in contrast to the dysfunctional narratives that are already in place.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is important, but yet difficult, because I still yet to hear a church praying for their own country or society, not about economic prosperity.
Yes.
I still need to, wait for a church that does not do it, right, for your own country, right?
Let me give a negative example. This will be brief. A few years ago in the US, there was something called the Red Campaign. And it was an attempt to, Vincent Miller and Consuming Religion writes about this. It was an attempt to address the problem of HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. And the way they were trying to raise money for it, obviously. And the way they were trying to do it was, you were supposed to buy red products, a red iPod from Apple, a red T-shirt from Target, a red tagged item from Levi's. And so they spent $10 million over a 10-year period to try to raise funds for sub-Saharan Africa. And they ended up raising $10 million, meaning they netted zero. And the problem was not so much the desire to serve and address the AIDS pandemic. The problem was the underlying narrative of the way we're going to fix that was with consumerism.
Right.
And so that's what I mean by these underlying narratives. We say, oh, in fact, they brought out all these individuals to be spokespersons. It was Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt, all these mega superstars. Individuals came out and said, we want to see this change. They built a whole structure called the Red Campaign. They were on TV, but they weren't changing the narrative, because we were going to fix this problem, not with changing the system and changing the narrative, but actually buying into the system and narrative even more. And so you can't fight a problem that's rooted in consumerism, the greed of the pharmaceutical companies, with more consumerism. And so that's what I mean by changing the narrative and not just changing individuals and structures.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much for insight. Let's hear another question from the on-site participants. Do we have somebody asking questions out there in Korea? Yeah.
In response to what I just heard, recently I was on a prayer call meeting with a group of evangelicals in the States, and it was a group of evangelical women, and they were targeting the Colombian elections, the Colombian elections, and they were praying against a communist government. Could you speak to what can be some strategies in engaging across these divisions, because red baiting is such an issue here in Korea when we are even talking about reconciliation with the North.
Neither you, yeah.
Thank you very much. Whew. All right, very briefly. I am personally inspired by the holding on to democratic convictions in Colombia. Colombia is a very divided country. Obviously, the pandemic has made the economic crisis even deeper. Colombia is a very unequal country, and about a little more than half the population who could vote has elected this president, this newly elected president, Gustavo Petro, who represents very progressive forces. He brings a new, very innovative economic plan, really breaking with neoliberal economic policies that have been the rule in Colombia for a long time. I personally do not assume he is going to be governing like a communist. Yes, he is going to be governing in a very progressive way with different economic policies. But I think that what we need to pray for is that everyone in Colombia can find the possibility of trusting each other and find ways to deal with their problems in nonviolent ways. Because when you have lived, so many generations, with 70 years, with so much violence, like in Peru, people resort to violence very often when they feel threatened, when they feel that something is not going their way. I am very concerned that if things don't go well for the new government in Colombia, the violence could get a lot worse because of the great anxiety that prevails in the region right now. I would very much support what Soong-Chan was saying about the working at different levels. And I do not believe the church should determine how people vote or how we pray. Certainly, the church should invite us to be responsible citizens, and each one according to our priorities and our inclinations politically. We should be free to support or oppose political parties. So I would invite everyone to please join me in prayers for Colombia and Peru. Peru has also a very left-leaning president who is very incompetent, and the opposition to the government is very disloyal. So it's not the democratic opposition that you would expect. So thank you so much for caring for Peru and Colombia.
Is there any questions from the on-site participants? I cannot see what's going on on-site, but any follow-up question, any other questions about for both Dina and Soong-Chan? Well, I do have a question that perhaps, and Dina, you could say a little bit. I heard that in Peru, the Peace and Hope initiative, there's some collaboration between Protestants and Catholics, right? I find that very interesting because it's also some sort of a reconciliation that comes out of a reconciliation project. Could you say a little bit more? Is there any effect? Yeah, that what's going on afterwards? Anything that happens between the two traditions? Yeah, could you say something about that? Yeah.
Yes. I also find it profoundly inspiring because sadly the predominant context has not been one that has motivated Christians who are Protestant and Christians who are Catholic to seek each other and collaborate and pray together. Although now you see that sadly for political reasons, but we can talk about that later. In the experience of Peace and Hope and the Episcopal Commission, what we had were these groups of relatively young professionals, law students, young lawyers, who were going to maximum security prisons to see who was there, because they had heard that the conditions in the prisons were terrible, and the families, Catholic and evangelical families from the Highlands, were contacting Peace and Hope saying, you know, our father was detained, our brother, they took my sister, they, etc. And they have condemned them for terrorism or treason. So that's what motivated them to go to the maximum security prisons and visit them. And that's how they started to gather all this information about the ongoing torture, the raping, I mean, all the atrocities connected with the way in which the Peruvian government was supposedly defending Peru from the rebels. When they were doing that, they found other young lawyers who were in the prison doing exactly the same. They discovered each other, and they were young. Now they are my age and above. Some of them have served as ministers of justice, congresspeople, pastors, etc. The friendship that started in those dirty prison cells where they met has continued until now. I would love to say, but I cannot say, that this represents that Protestant Christians and Catholic Christians in Peru get along well today. It's actually what I am highlighting here is mostly the exception to the pattern.
Right, right.
It is the exception to the pattern to find Christians who visit people in prison. It is the exception to the patterns to find Christians who care for those who are suffering violence and who live in the margins of society. So it is inspiring, but also a reason for lament that we are not seeing more of that. What we can see now, and I would argue that's more political manipulation than anything else, is that ultra-conservative forces are bringing the most conservative evangelicals and the most conservative Catholics to collaborate, but not for the affirmation of fundamental rights, but for the denial of rights of some people.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much for your comment. We do have several minutes. Actually, earlier, Celian, he sent me a personal message. I think perhaps we can end on this question. Perhaps Nina and both Soong-Chan can say something about that. Nari is relatively young. You know what we do here, but Peace and Hope, you've worked in Latin America for a long time. I mean, it's sometimes it's difficult to sustain hope within your organization, right? Because you are dealing with such things that are difficult to work on. Sometimes we don't see results and things like that. So is there one thing that you've learned doing the difficult work of reconciliation that you can share with us here for the Forum for Asia? Perhaps, and a similar question, perhaps, Soong-Chan, you can say something about that. Thank you. Yeah. Perhaps Nina, we can start with you, perhaps.
I was going to invite Soong-Chan since I have been talking
okay, sure.
Go ahead, Professor.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I shared this in my small group that when I was working in the prisons, the hope was that the prisoners would be released. And that's still a very important hope, in that you want to accomplish a goal. And the work that we're doing at North Park, at least 5 prisoners have been released over the last 2.5 years, which is an incredible record, and it's a good story. But I realized that sometimes the hope was not necessarily in the release from prison, because once you come out, it actually creates a whole different level of complexity. I've been texting with my friend who was released about a month ago, and I was sharing that he had $3,000 worth of fines in order to get his driver's license back, so he could then have ID that he can get housing. And that was pretty much all the money he had was just wiped out so he can get. So just the idea of there's an end goal, we're going to get prisoners released. I'm not sure that that's the hope. I mean, that's definitely something we want to do. It's definitely something we want to aspire to. But I think the hope that I found was in the community, in the moments where we connected in that prison classroom, the moments where we heard each other's stories, and in the midst of that, God was found in those stories. So I do think there are times when we achieve our goals that we should be able to celebrate and find the hope in, hey, we got here. We got to these places where, a couple of weeks ago, 70 students received their degrees through North Park inside Stateville. Those are wonderful moments of celebration. I'm sorry, 30 students, 70 students that are enrolled. Those are wonderful moments of celebration. So those kinds of real accomplishments of freedom for the captives, those are good things that we should not downplay. But sometimes the joy is in these quiet moments of community, the quiet moments of peace found, and the dividing walls of hostility that are being torn down. And I think the easiest burnout is when we start thinking about, if we don't get X number of things done, if we don't have X number of prisoners freed or X number of projects accomplished, then we are not successful. Versus the joy of Christ in our midst across the dividing walls of hostility. Sometimes that's some of the most significant production that we could actually be a part of. Not just the certain accomplishments, but the journeying together and the joy of being in community despite the challenges.
Thank you. Nina?
Amen. I echo what Soong-Chan was saying. I would add, the work of peace and hope is very local, right? We don't have national plans to transform the Peruvian government or the Colombian government. We recognize that's very important, but that is not the work of peace and hope. Our work is very much serving and strengthening local communities. And that is where we find hope, that even though there is so much adversity, because it's just that the injustice in the distribution of, I probably sound like communist to you, but I promise you, I am not a communist. But when you go and see the way wealth is so drastically distributed in ways that people have so much, and beautiful people created in the image of God have nothing in the same country, in the same city, sometimes even just, if you visit Rio de Janeiro, you will see that, this opulence, and then next to the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. So the problems are very real. This is not exaggerating. But so we don't have a solution for that. But when we work with the teams are working with the local communities, and they can see that the young boys, 14, 16, 17, are choosing to stay in school rather than joining the gang. When they are, seeking support so that they will not be connected to the drug dealers, even though that, would give them easy money very quickly. Although they will know that they will be killed 2 years down the road, because that's what happens. So it's just very small. They are very small seeds, but of transformation that is taking place at a very local level. When talking to women who have suffered abuse, and now they feel dignified, and they are able to be agents of their own future, right? They are not used by others, and they are choosing to be part of a Christian community. It is just so much hope, even though the prevailing circumstances bring so much adversity. You can see God is at work. I am very, very much for separation of church and state. I do believe that we should pray for the spirit of solidarity, the spirit of equality, the blessing of God, the mercy, the love of peace, a way to solve our conflicts and differences in non-violent ways. That's what should be sought in every dimension of life. But I hope I am representing well that most of my colleagues in Peace and Hope, we would have very clear that it is not about capturing political power, but as citizens of our respective countries, we do have a voice and we do have portion of power with our vote. Therefore, we want to promote civic education so that everyone realizes that even though it may be small, they are responsible for that portion of citizen power they have. And when citizen power, individual citizen power, which is minimal, can come together and organized through collective action, we can advocate for better policies, not for us to enact those policies, but to, as citizens, demand that the government can do more to protect communities that are more vulnerable to violence, that the government can issue policies that protect women better, that protect children better, that invite people to reconsider that they cannot get away with corruption as easily as they do. So it's interconnected, but the hope that we do find has a lot more to do with transformation at the local level than anything else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lina. Yes, we should continue to look for signs of hope, although sometimes they can be difficult to find. So thank you very much, Lina, and also Soong-Chan, for your wonderful sharing today and yesterday.